Hello, everyone. A big warm welcome to our second session in today's webinar, which is our Peppy's Preventative Health at Work series. I'm Sarah Redwood. I'm going to be your host for the session today, and I'll have some speakers I'll introduce you to in a minute. But before we get into the bulk of today's session, I'll just cover a few sort of housekeeping bits. As you can all probably tell, it is being recorded, so we will be recording the session. We will be able to share it with you afterwards. There is going to be time for Q&A at the end. So it's a 45-minute webinar. We will have 10 minutes approximately for Q&A at the end. So if you have got a question as we go through, please just put it in the Q&A box and we will hopefully get time to answer it at the end. If not, we will make sure that we follow up with everyone with common questions and answers at the end of the session as well. If you have a question, please do ask it. I always say this, there's a really good chance that if you're wondering something that someone else is too. So please do use the Q&A section if you've got something you'd like to ask one of the panelists. If you do have any problems, any technical issues that you can see on the screen there, please do email marketing@peppy.health and they are in the background and they will be able to help you. So I think that's everything on the housekeeping side of things. I hope you're all somewhere lovely and sunny as I am in our office in London today. But today we are going to be talking about something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime, which is men's health. More specifically, we're going to be talking about why it's not being given very much attention by employers specifically, and what we can all do in this room to help change that. We've got a stat to get you all started, just worth having this front of mind as we go through the discussion. Men are 32% less likely than women to visit the doctor. I can relate to this firsthand with the men in my life, and I suppose just it'll be interesting if you all take a minute and think about whether this is something you can relate to firsthand, or with the men in your life, perhaps you can relate to it secondhand. Most men wait until something is seriously wrong before they visit the doctor. And by then it's often too late. What does this mean for them? It means that men face far higher risks of life-threatening conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. In fact, the overall result of this is that 1 in 5 men die before they reach retirement age. I think most of us on the call will know that there's a lower life expectancy for men than women. This is something I talk about in my day-to-day role. No one seems surprised, but actually the fact that 1 in 5 men die before reaching retirement age seems to be quite shocking. It's clearly a problem for men. It's clearly a problem for employers too. A specific example is prostate cancer, which is now the most diagnosed cancer in England. And men are not only 56% more likely to develop non-gender specific cancers, they're 67% more likely to die from them. So today we'd like to explore, why is this? What can employers be doing about it? So I've got a brilliant panel of people that are going to be joining me today. I'm very much just the host, and I'm going to be talking to 3 brilliant humans who know this space inside out and are doing incredible things, incredible work to shift the dial. So first up, we have a Peppy team member, which is Bernadette. I will let her introduce herself properly, but she is Peppy's men's health lead practitioner, or as I like to call her, the ultimate straight talker who gets men talking about things they've probably been ignoring for years. Then we've got Aaron Barnett, who is Peppy's director. I like this, if people can just come onto screen as I mention their names. Aaron Barnett is Peppy's director of lifestyle healthcare. He's part personal trainer, part health nerd, and 100% passionate about making movement and prevention part of everyday life. And then lastly, I'm joined by someone from one of our clients, Paul Duggan, who's our very special client guest today. Paul is Global Health and Wellbeing Lead for EMEA at Accenture, one of Peppy's clients, and he has been leading wellbeing strategies across continents. He's all about making support more accessible, inclusive, and impactful, and leads by example. He's a real inspiration to employers and employees alike. And actually, in fact, when we caught up with Paul earlier on this week, he was out having a lunchtime walk, so really practicing what he teaches in terms of healthy living. Can you both just can you all just give a brief hello and introduce yourselves, in your own words, and then I've got a poll to get us all started.
Fantastic. So I'm Bernadette. I'm the lead men's health practitioner here at Peppy. With my background's quite extensive in the clinical environment, but been with Peppy for quite a while now, and I love that we've got this opportunity today to really get men's health on the radar to a wider audience.
Thanks, Bernadette. And Aaron?
Yeah, and I've got loads of experience in the non-clinical side of things, the more lifestyle side of things. My speciality is more around exercise, movement, health, and encouraging engagement in exercise and activity. And yeah, I'm really, I obviously being male myself, I'm passionate about, championing men talking, men engaging in their health. And kind of starting to redefine what exercise is as well. I think that's really important when we talk to men.
Yeah, and we'll talk further on in the session about the advantages of you're both different perspectives and why men come to each of you with different things and how it sort of ties up. And lastly, Paul.
Yes, hello everyone. Paul Duggan, part of the Global Health and Wellbeing team at Accenture. I've been at Accenture my entire career, and initially very much in the professional services consulting space. But about 9 years ago, and we'll talk about this maybe a bit later, I burnt out and developed an interest in basically mental health, taking care of yourself better and helping other people avoid some of the mistakes I've made. And that's over time transitioned into me moving into HR. So I've been focused on sort of designing and delivering health and wellbeing programs for the last 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving us your time. So I'm going to get started with the poll that we have. So if we can get that up on the screen, Peppy team. We'd love to know from all of you, how would you describe men's engagement with health in your organisation? The answers we've got are, we've got great support and it's working. We offer support, but it's underused. It's on the to-do list and I'm not sure. So we'll just give it a few seconds for everyone to answer. If it's on your screen, please click the status for your workplace. And I'll be really interested to see what people come up with. Okay, so the vast majority are we offer support, but it's underused. That's really not shocked me, but I just immediately come to the panel. Paul, what's your reaction to that?
Sorry, struggling to unmute. You might have seen me smirk. I mean, doesn't surprise me at all. I think we've seen progress in acknowledging the need for mental health specific support. We've seen organisations, obviously like Peppy, bringing things to businesses to build that space, but it still can be a struggle to actually, one, obviously just drive awareness, which is a more generic challenge with offering support to employees, but two, specifically getting men to overcome some of those barriers that stop them from engaging with support and engaging in a timely fashion. So yeah, not a surprise, unfortunately, but great to see so many people are providing male specific support. So that I think is a positive we should take away from that.
Yeah. Worth everyone knowing who's listening that the lowest answer we got there, the smallest number of people saying we got great support and it's working. So if you are not in that group, you're in the vast majority. Very few people seem to have this really sorted out. And I suppose Bernadette, Aaron, your initial reactions to that, is that what you'd expect people to say? We offer the majority far and away, we offer support, but it's underused.
It's great to see that, and I think certainly even in the past 3 years since I've been at Peppy, I think men's health is more there's greater awareness and more effort being put into it. I'm not surprised that it's underutilized at all, and I think that's for a variety of reasons.
So let's start with the elephant in the room then. And it seems like it is a controversial topic. And I know that all of the guests on our panel will want to have your say on why don't men ask for help? Is this true? And why is it a workplace concern? Why do workplaces have to think about this?
Well, I'll dive in and I'll say, well, the impetus for it, look at that first stat. That isn't just a stat, that 1 in 5 died before the age of 65. That is people in the workplace. These are your friends, colleagues, co-workers. We all need to be invested in this. And in terms of why aren't men engaging as well, I'd flip that. Also, I'd flip the question, what are we actively doing to encourage men to seek help? we might make things available, but that sometimes that's just not good enough, especially historically in the healthcare setting. Men have not had the touch points inbuilt, so whether that's access to screening. For some men, the first time they might be invited into a clinic is when they're 65. So if those regular touch points haven't happened, the exposure to education to these healthcare professionals, as much as you'll promote awareness about concerning health symptoms, if somebody hasn't got those behaviours ingrained or finds even talking about a simple symptom so challenging, even though they know it's the right thing to do, taking that big step, making that action is a massive hurdle to them, and which is something really we need to have on our radar about how do we support them to take the action, to engage with that benefit or that preventative, that promotion of health strategy that is available in the workplace. And I think that's coming at it in a range of different ways. You know, every man will be different. There's not one size fits all. The goal can be the same, but we need to explore different avenues to get there.
And Paul, I suppose, live on the ground in an organisation that does support and wants to be proactive about addressing men's health, why are men not engaging in the same way, and why should organisations care about this?
I mean, I think the care answer is very straightforward, because almost every organisation, your people are one of, if not your main asset, and if they're not well, they're less productive, less effective. And there's always, with health and well-being, a really nice synchronicity between the data between people being well and people helping businesses do what they want to do, which is be effective, make money, retain the best staff, etc. I think the challenge there is that's sometimes a long-term investment, and it involves cultural change, which can be hard to do. And I think with men specifically, again, I think there are reasons men don't reach out for help. We'll get onto that in a second, but we also need to look at how we're designing programs to appeal to and engage with men. I've made the transition into human resources, for example, over the last 5 years, and the reality is the gender balance is significantly different in human resources, and there's a lot of companies. And I have encountered situations where you've got people designing wellbeing programs or inclusion programs, and there's no male voices in the room. And it doesn't matter who the minority is. If people aren't represented when you're designing solutions, it's much less likely it's going to appeal to them. And I think what you sometimes see that manifesting is things like sometimes, and I'm generalizing enormously about men here, but some of the language used can be a bit sort of fluffy, or just certain people it won't get to. Like, there's one training course I've been on where they said, eat foods that are worthy of you. And I was just a bit like, and it's the kind of thing, and there'll probably be some women that don't resonate with either, but more generalizing enormously, some of those kind of languages will just put people off. Similarly, if by turning up to a session, you're acknowledging that something's wrong, for some men, that will be, they won't go through the door, because that means you're admitting some kind of weakness. So there's got to be thought into that design, and how we design things that, if they are for everyone, they are for everyone, or targeting specific groups with different things. I mean, another example I'd give is there's quite a few companies that are marketing fertility support at the moment in a very gendered way. And when you challenge them and say, well, hang on, is this just for women? They go, oh, no, it's for men too. But if you look at it, if you were a man looking at it, you would not think it was for you. And, fertility is just as much a male challenge as it is a female challenge. And then I do think we need to acknowledge what a lot of men bring into the workplace in terms of their expectations of themselves. And I would, 10 years ago, firmly put myself in that bucket. My kind of view was I had to be successful because I had to be the person who would be providing an income. And my definition of success was very narrow by that basis. So it was get the next pay rise, get to the next level. And the way to do that was to be the person that sort of kept going when everyone else stopped. So I'd be the one who could solve problems other people couldn't. I'd be the one who, stay up late to fix things other people wouldn't. And there is a reality that sometimes in the corporate world, you kind of get rewarded for those behaviours in the short term, but in the long term, it catches up with you. And the way it caught up with me was 10 weeks off for burnout. Now, I have also subsequently quite recently found I have ADHD, which probably also compounded some of those behaviours and contributed to that burnout. But again, that almost lack of curiosity about my health up to that point is probably another reason I haven't found that out until fairly recently. And I think that's very common, that men have, and again, not exclusively men, but men will have a sense of one, almost a bit of duty around their approach to work, but also there's a bit of glorification of self-sacrifice as a way of proving that you are a good contributor or a good family member. And the reality is that's kind of backwards logic, because at some point it means you're going to be the one that needs looking after, versus putting your self-care first, so you can be the person you want to be in terms of being, provider, a good employer, etc., a carer to your family, but in a way that's sustainable and, is good for you as well as the people around you.
Yeah, I think a lot of men will be able to relate to what you've just said. I think it'll be familiar for a lot of, if there are any men listening. I'm going to come to Aaron now, and obviously, you're head of lifestyle, fitness, nutrition at Peppy. Do you see certain life moments or health scares or something else that finally pushes men to act and engage? And I suppose, you often talk about your area of speciality being, and I've heard you say this, sort of an easier entry point for men. What do you mean by that? Can you sort of expand on that side of things?
Yeah, entry for men is like I was saying, is kind of trying to redefine what it takes to start making a change. It's often, again, it's quite egocentric sometimes, and it's quite, the challenge is also always got to be great, and it's trying to redefine that and trying to break down a little bit of ego. It's really interesting question, like, do we see moments that really are that turning point in a man's life? And I think someone like Paul has identified that, yes, there are certain turning points, whether it's a moment of where you've realized you have to make a change for your health and for your productivity. But actually, it doesn't always. And in my kind of personal side, with friends and whatnot, and even with family members, it hasn't always led to change. And there's still, so for instance, my brother had a heart attack, and he still struggles to come to terms with the fact that he has to make some lifestyle changes in order to prolong his life for his time with his daughter, etc., and a productive work time and social life. And I think that comes from kind of, there's still a stigma around saying I need help, and it's seen as being vulnerable, and vulnerability is seen as weakness still. And actually, I've even experienced it where people like my brother and others, friends, will actually double down on their habits and on their poor lifestyles, and might play it off with humor, or because admitting that they need to change often means that you're wrong. So it's interesting, because there are all these turning 40, turning 50, becoming a dad, having a heart issue or some sort of medical issue. But I found that it doesn't always equal men making a change. And for me, I think going back to the second half of your question, is how do we create, it's another question, but how do we create a safe, relatable environment where men don't feel like they're being judged? And it's got to be subtle, and it's got to be small and consistent, and it's got to breed some confidence as well. Because I am personally, I know my ego gets in the way sometimes when I know I need to do something different.
And people will quite often appear on a consultation or a session with you, using the Peppy service, and obviously the area you look after being all around fitness, you'll think that's what they're there for. But can you expand a bit on how sometimes that brings them in, and actually it's a completely different thing that they want to talk about, and how that might then tie into Bernadette's area?
Yeah, I love this, and this is why I truly love working at Peppy. Like, I've been a personal trainer and all sorts, but this is where it's a bit different, is we get to set a standard, and we get to be a really nice kind of parachute landing into other areas of healthcare. So someone may come to us with, feeling, like they want to lose some weight, but when you start digging and we start getting down to the reasons why they might want to, the motivations, or actually when you dive into like, okay, so tell us about what's going on, it actually could turn out to be something more medically orientated. But I think when they've met someone like them and someone that can empathize with them, it then breaks that barrier down into healthcare. And then we often will bridge that gap between my team and Bernadette's team as mental health practitioners. We can kind of break down that and bridge that gap and give them the opportunity, and that they feel more confident in then talking to the likes of B.
Yeah. And Paul, from your experience, what is it about either men or workplace culture that sometimes stops men from engaging with their health, such that they might turn up with a more serious health issue in a fitness environment, or just not engaging with anything at all? What do you think? What role do line managers or leaders play in setting the tone? And have you seen this work well anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think role modeling is fundamental. And a great example is parenting, having senior male leaders talk about how they will leave at X o'clock to go and spend time with their children, gives everyone else permission to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I do think we're still dealing with a legacy of, you look at the disparity in parental leave, which is better than it was in a lot of places, but it still actually re-entrenches those gender roles and the expectation that the man's the one that goes straight back to work and carries on earning. So role modeling is really important. I think line managers, I don't think it's specific to men really, but it's just about creating a psychologically safe environment so people can put their hand up and say what they want, and actively doing that rather than just hoping people do it. So with your team, periodically asking people, making sure you understand their commitments outside of work, encouraging people, if you're in a desk-based role, to use their diaries for not just meetings, but for breaks, for exercise, for out of work commitments. We talked earlier about I have a walking meeting, I have a walk in my diary every day. Do I do it every day? No, because perfectionism is not the goal, but I'm much more likely to do it by having it there than if I don't have it. And equally, I'm happy to move it around. It doesn't have to be at the same time every day. Sometimes my lunch breaks at 10 o'clock in the morning because I know the right thing for me to do is to be on a call at 12 o'clock. So role modeling fundamentally, actually seeing as part of your role as a line manager to make the space for people to say what they need. And I think sort of with that, micro check-ins are really important. So checking with people regularly, don't just see it as a performance feedback activity like 6 months, giving someone a performance review. Giving people, the more you kind of check in on people, the more likely people are to tell you they need help. And then actually another thing as a line manager or a leader is actually making sure your people understand the support that's available. I think sometimes we can be quite passive in terms of that's HR's job to tell people about the benefits that are available, but we actually know that people are far more likely to use things when they're recommended by their peers, when they can be discussed in a small environment so people can understand. Because often a lot of these things are, a logo, you can see the Peppy logo here, right? People don't always understand what sits behind them, and they're not always going to turn up to a dedicated call on that because they're busy. So seeding that information in on a regular basis into your teams can actually make a really big difference as well.
Brilliant. Right, now we're going to bust some myths, and I would love you all to have one outdated stereotype about men and health that still shows up in the workplace, and just one each, please, and under 20 seconds. So how fast can you be? Bernadette, I'm going to go to you first. Myth.
Mine is men don't want to talk about it. I think create the right environment, although not borne out by that initial poll that we ran. Absolutely, If we approach things in a different way, we can flip that stat, but that's on us and everybody offering support, hopefully, who will.
Okay, myth 1, men don't want to talk about it. Aaron, myth 2.
I'm doubling down, like silence is strength. Silence is strength is a myth, and I think leaders need to show, like Paul said, leaders need to show vulnerability and authenticity in talking about it as well, because that's what creates a change.
Men don't want to talk about it. Silence is strength. Paul,
the other myth for me is the idea that men don't want to spend as much time with their children as women do, which I think is not true. But men don't necessarily want to admit that, but there's lots of studies that show that actually if men could get away earlier and take more paternity leave, etc., that they would very much like to do so.
Yep, I think we're going to see a huge shift in this over the next 10, 20 years. I really, really hope this is the case. And then this is completely unrelated to PEPI or Accenture or anything we're here to talk about, but I would really recommend Of Boys and Men, which is a book I've just finished reading last week, and talks a lot about this being a really helpful step if employers can extend the amount of support available for fathers specifically. So the next step the next sort of part of the session today we're going to talk about is how do we get men to take action? We sort of understand that there's a job to do, and understanding men specifically, and how do we make sure that wellbeing offers are designed with them in mind, and their relationship to health and wellbeing in general. So Bernadette, I'm going to come to you first. What are some of the best preventative tactics you've seen in action, especially for things like prostate health, diabetes, and mental health?
I think this is where it needs, well, what I've seen is the variation in approaches works. For some people, it might be a group with peers at work, informal setting, perhaps, a little cafe type group get together. It could be just 2 people, but a much less formal environment. For other things, such as, creating awareness around diabetes, what smart things can you do in the workplace, and that we've seen work? So whether it's promoting things around diabetes, but do some actions. What are you doing? Are you doing something at the same time to provide education where it's not formal again? Are you making things accessible? We all work in different ways. Is there an online element? Are there some pop-ups? So, for example, some organisations do. So almost going through this whole range of the pressure-free, accessible, but by doing that, actually, you're helping men to engage without them feeling forced, because many of us have got enough pressures already to add on another pressure where you feel forced to engage without it feeling directly relevant to you. Men won't do. So I think they're the best things I've seen work well in the workplace for uptake.
Okay, brilliant. And Aaron, you've been motivating men and to move and take control of their health for years. What actually gets them to engage, especially for those who really have been avoiding it over the long term? So how important is it to combine these lifestyle changes with proper clinical support?
Yeah, I think B's right. You've got to make it relevant. It's got to be current. And there's an oxymoron that I like, is make it competitively achievable, because it then becomes a little bit social. And like most of us, most men don't actually want a full fitness overhaul. They just want to feel a bit better, feel a bit sharper, being able to keep up with their kids, and being able to play with their kids and take that time. So making it kind of adding that layer of friendly challenge and banter definitely goes a long way. And actually, there's studies that show that men that engage better when they're in a shared active setting. That's a really great, when we're talking about barriers, how people come to me before going to B, or how I get people to come to me is by making that setting competitive but not confrontational. Men don't like face-to-face, how are you today? What's going on with your health? They like to be side by side. How are you getting on? How are you feeling? How's your knee? And then it rolls into that conversation. So
I was just going to jump in. It's normalising the conversation. I know I didn't touch on it, but I know you mentioned prostate health, Sarah, and my background, over a decade, urology, speaking about prostate health, speaking to men, getting additional blood samples for research, pre-prostate biopsy, being able to, to me, that's second nature to be able to talk about these really important areas in men's health. It's how we transfer that and allow everybody to have almost the same level of education, as well being empowered about their own health, but importantly, they feel able to take the next steps if they've got more questions or if they need support with any symptoms they might have.
It's interesting what you were saying earlier about the confrontational approach, and men don't want that looking straight at you, asking this really direct question. And I thought that ties in really nicely with I know that the chat function, so the PEPI service, you can chat with a practitioner and not have to book a consultation. And I think my understanding is that that part of the service is utilised unusually well in the men's service. And do you think that's speaking to the same thing, Bernadette? Is that, people just say
Absolutely.
not have that, really difficult face-to-face, you can just drop a message.
Yeah.
Seems to resonate well.
And that links up with that pressure-free environment.
Yeah.
I think judgment is a horrendous barrier in men's health, and that removes it, whilst also having the confidence you've got somebody specialist in that area who was there to appropriately support.
Absolutely. Paul, you work for a pretty exceptional employer. I think that Accenture's approach to health and wellbeing is pretty next level. We do speak to lots of employers, so I feel pretty confident in saying that. Can you share some standout initiatives or learnings that have helped get men on board, and ideally that other people can take away and perhaps look to implement in their organisations as well?
Yeah, and to be clear, we are still on a journey in this space as well. I mean, one thing is actually look at your data, because your data may be telling you interesting things, like look at your men's engagement in, for example, mental health services versus women's, and don't necessarily assume that if one's higher or lower than the other, it means that there's not an issue. It might be an engagement thing. So look at how people are using your services. I think, obviously, if you're going to talk about it, have some support in place that you can signpost people to. So, making a big song and dance about something and then nowhere for people to go is actually probably worse, because you're burning that opportunity. I think there's certain events that really work to lean into, like Movember. I'm a big fan of. The research they do is great. It's got all the things Aaron talked about in terms of like an element of camaraderie, an element of competitiveness. It's inclusive, which is another really important point. So, anyone can get involved. It doesn't have to be about growing a moustache. And I think that's the other thing that's really important is I think we need to make these kind of initiatives. So where we have things like International Men's Day, International Women's Day, they need to be about everyone and the role they play for that topic. So when we're talking about International Women's Day, it's one of the things, how can men be more supportive around menopause, for example? Why is it important to understand it? When it comes to International Men's Day, it's about how do you, for example, talk to your partner and create space for them to open up, because it might not be the same way you do it with your female friends, for example. So it doesn't feel like a, IMD versus IWD, for example. It feels like when we're having these conversations, they're for everyone and they're about everyone. And I think it's important for two reasons. One, because you're never going to solve these things by splitting people into groups, but also it helps people feel like it's not just on them. So it's not just on the men to help the men. It's not just on the women to help the women. And obviously I'm using sort of gender-specific terms, but people in between as well. Because when you feel like it's on you to solve the problems that you've kind of inherited by virtue of just who you are, you've grown up with, no matter who you are, that's very challenging. So making it feel like it's about everyone. And also the other thing that's really important about that is it gives, from a men's health perspective, something I think has probably been a bit absent for the last decade or so. It gives it more equity in the narrative, when I think it has felt like a bit of an invisible conversation for a lot of people, which only compounds the idea that men should not talk about this stuff, because we're talking about all these other things in the workplace, but we're not talking about men's health. So, and then the last thing I think this actually addresses one of the questions in the chat is really think about which audiences you're trying to reach, because you will have an audience of engaged men already. You'll have people like me who are on board. Yep. Me turning up to your International Men's Day event is not really a win, because you're probably going to tell me a bunch of stuff I already know and I already do. Someone who's never been in the room before, that's a win. So, for example, we got Kevin Sinfield, the rugby player, in last year. I've never seen more people in the room or on the phone, because a lot of men like rugby, a lot of men know who he is. He's got an amazing story, and he talks really effectively about vulnerability and leadership. And he says all the things that, a lot of other wellbeing speakers would say, but he says it in a way that is relatable by virtue of just who he is and the way, a certain group of men sort of hold him up as someone they look up to. So thinking about the kind of people you're bringing in to talk. Whereas conversely, I was on another call about men's health recently, and someone asked a question about getting men to open up, and the answer was, I'll get them to read a Brené Brown book. And Brené Brown does some great work, but probably, blue collar man's probably not going to pick up Atlas of the Heart without quite a lot of prompting and hand holding. So getting those people that resonate with men, I think, is a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to do another really quick fire round now. So 20-second answer each, which the question is, if you had to pick just one thing employers should do this year to improve men's health engagement, what would it be? Bernadette, over to you first.
Approach it in a smart way, a variety of ways. Don't just play to one audience. Don't just think that keynote speaker is going to hit home with everybody in the organization. Invest and don't make it feel deeper what you're trying to achieve. Plow the efforts in, and then hopefully you'll see the rewards with engagement.
Yeah, so multi-channel, personalized.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Aaron, what's your one?
Make lifestyle and health work endorsed. Embed it into the day. Bring health into the company physically, and you'll have more success that way by bringing it in.
Okay, perfect. And Paul?
I think going back to what I was saying towards the start, make sure you've got male voices involved in the design of your people wellbeing inclusion programs, and that is also on the men to turn up to those things, because I also see quite a lot of kind of employee resource groups plus ones, less men turn up to do those things. So it's not just about inviting them, it's also on us as men to put ourselves in the room as well and have that voice.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Right, I'm conscious we've got so many questions that have come through, so thank you to everyone who has shared one. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but we'll try and prepare some follow-up materials for you all so that we can share some answers to the questions. So first one I'm going to ask you, Paul, if that's okay, which is, have you got any suggestions, particularly again given the number of employees that Accenture has, as to how to scale this topic in large organizations? Someone said they find having these conversations and engaging at a personal level is fine, but there are just so many people, champions, central functions, leadership, top down. What works from your perspective?
So from a scale perspective, I think the answer is to keep what you're doing at the macro level simple and leave people space to add what they works locally. So, an example of that would be, at the moment, we're running our global mental health campaign. We've just got one action we're asking everyone to take, which is to take some kind of mental health pledge, and then it will handhold them to how they fulfill that pledge. Whereas in previous years, we've probably put on too many calls. And it's also, when you are running campaigns or designing things, start with the ask. There'll be a bunch of people who want to understand the science and the rationale, but if they want to go on and read that, fine. But put the too long didn't read version up front, which just says, we want you to do this. Obviously, make sure it's an impactful activity, because lots of people doing a couple of things is going to be far more impactful than some people doing loads and loads of things. So be quite precise about it. And it also then gives people something they can rally around. And it's much easier to measure. So just be quite precise at a large level, give people simple actions, and then give them the space to think about how they deliver those messages in a more local environment.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. One thing specifically, and I think this is, ultimately what we want to come down to, is how do we show results and how do we show that this is having an impact for people? So how do we measure the success of the initiatives that we aim at men? Or is it just too difficult to measure because it's too intangible? I open that up to the panel if anyone wants to take it. How do we measure the results or the success?
Well, I can speak. I'm coming at this obviously from my clinical perspective. I can say firsthand, I can put my hand on my heart and say to you, I know directly via our service, we have had at least 2 responses this week for very significant health conditions that otherwise that mental health user would not have accessed support, even though they had concerns in the first place. We helped to guide them. So to me, looking at that stat, that 1 in 5, I know we want to see bigger numbers for engagement in the workforce, but that is huge to me on a daily basis. I'm very lucky in my exposure for what I see. These are real people, but I know we want to scale it. but I think we've got the building block, and this is where we make improvements, and this is a benefit of today.
So I suppose there's clinical measures, and then there's that management information from providers that might be able to support you, like Peppy's one example. But I mean, Paul, is there anything else that employers can do to measure the impact?
Well, the other really important thing, which often gets forgotten, is to actually baseline when you are making a change.
Yeah, totally.
Actually look at your data at that point to see what changes, because, you know, if you are fortunate enough to work in an organisation that has health insurance, for example, if you are focusing on like lifestyle, the kind of stuff Aaron's talked about, you should see changes in your numbers around things like, and you just need to be realistic about how quickly that will happen. But if you don't take a note of those numbers at the start, you're going to find it very hard to prove why those changes are happening. So there's a baseline, but do look at health data. I think there has been historically a tendency for people to kind of rely more on sentiment around designing wellbeing programs, and employee sentiment is really important. But there's lots of good clinical data out there. If you have insurance, you've got data that tells you what your employees' top conditions are. It's usually available by gender. And then if you don't have insurance, there's still an enormous amount of kind of research out there that you can lean into in terms of the things you should be trying to change for your population, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at baseline data, definitely a key takeaway. I'm going to wrap up there because we've got 1 minute until we promised everyone we would stop after 45 minutes. So just a massive, massive thank you to Bernadette, Aaron and Paul. Amazing panel and so many useful insights and tips and just, yeah, a great conversation telling the truth. So really, really appreciate you all giving us your time. If you are sitting on the other side of this and thinking we really need to do more around this in our business, it sounds like you are far from alone, you know, from the poll at the beginning. And the good news is small changes can go a long way, and we are here to help you here at Peppy. We will follow up with you after the event and share a quick recap, some extra resources, and try and answer some of the questions we didn't get to. I'm conscious that there were several that we didn't cover. We also have the third and final part of the series, all about building preventative health cultures that last. So if you would like to join us for the next one, it's in a couple of months' time, towards the middle of the summer. You can just scan the QR code on the screen here to register. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you all again so much for your time, to our panel and those who tuned in to listen. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.